Welcome to the Boxing Breakdown with your host, Mark Roxey, and co-host, Dwayne Pham. All right, folks, welcome to the Boxing Breakdown with your host, Mark Roxey. And today in the studio, I have Vic Starita, the famous and amazing, talented Cutman. Vic, welcome to the program. What's up, brother?
Hey, Coach, trying to be sexy like you, brother. Trying to keep it from losing my mind. 5 weeks here at my home in Pennsylvania, isolated by myself. Just trying. We got fights opening up here in the next month or so without audience, but just trying to stay focused on that.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned that you're out in Pennsylvania and you're by yourself. What's up with that? Like
I travel a lot, but my significant other is in Mexico. She and I have a place down in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and I had to get back up here because as a retired Marine, I don't have overseas coverage, healthcare coverage. So I needed to be in case I got sick with the coronavirus. I needed to be someplace where I knew that I would be, I'd make it through it, have medical care.
Yeah, that's right. So good choice. So you're here in Pennsylvania, and you and I stay in touch pretty regularly. So I just want to tell you how delighted I am to have you on the program, and I wanted to maybe just chat a little bit about your background and as both a Cutman, but even before being a Cutman, obviously you're a boxing lover and you've always been a boxing lover, but tell me about your life before becoming a Cutman.
So I used to box amateur, and I boxed a little bit in the Marine Corps, and I boxed Masters divisions. And unfortunately, I've suffered all my life, like my kids did, I'm a bleeder. So, I bleed fairly easy. And my kids were national champions. And when you're a bleeder, they could stop that fight. In the amateurs, it doesn't take much to stop a fight. And I wanted to give my kids the best chance possible to do whatever it is they wanted to do in their life, whether it be wrestling, boxing, whatever. And they chose boxing. So I wanted them to go as far as they could possibly go while they wanted to do it. And that's why I became a Cutman. And before that, I was a Marine. I served the United States Marine Corps, my country, and I was very proud of that. And I've done a lot of different things in my life. But yeah, I ended up being a Cutman because I wanted my kids to have every possible chance to get as far as they wanted to, as long as they wanted to.
Wow, Vic, that's amazing. And, just let me just say, I'm sure the listeners would agree that just thank you so much for your service and serving in the United States Marine Corps. And, you're just the folks out there that haven't actually met you, or I'm sure they've seen you on programs on television, etc. PBC or Showtime or, a variety of the boxing venues. But, I don't think a lot of people know that you were a Marine, and that's really incredible. And so how do you, tell me about your feeling about COVID-19 and how it's kind of just halted everything in boxing. Like, we are at a grinded halt. Like, tell me what your feeling is about that.
Well, I think, there's so few people in boxing that make a living at it as an athlete. Of course, there are the people who put the money up for the show, promoters, and rightfully they're taking the risk, and they're managers. But there's so few guys that make money on the sport as boxers, like real money for the amount of time, effort, and risk that they take. And when you finally get signed, and you're with a good promotion, and they keep you busy, you're fighting every 2 months. These are the guys who are like the top guys. That, they're fighting every 2 months. Well, not all of them, but there's a good decent amount of guys that fight every 2 months. And like out in Cali, a lot of guys are signed. They fight every 2 months, 2.5 months. They have a lease car, they have an apartment, and they have a per diem per month. Well, when the fights come to a standstill, these guys, their money, can be a problem.
That's
and
right.
The guys who are not signed, who are on the B side, that stay busy fighting and they try to put bread and food on their table for their families or provide for themselves, it's tough because now there are no fights. So what are they going to do? And then COVID-19 shut down everything. So unless you're working at Walmart or a hospital or something that's essential, you're not making money. It's much harder for an athlete.
Yeah, you got that right. And a lot of the fighters are really doing everything that they can to make sure that they can stay in their boxing regimens and training regimens, running regimens, and then a lot of them are holding down full-time jobs, and the ones that aren't holding down full-time jobs are boxing full-time. So either way you cut it, they're all, everybody's hurting across the board. And the promoters are hurting. The television networks are hurting. Everyone's having a real tough time with this. But I don't know. To me, it seems like there's a major renaissance is going to take place here, because a lot of the promoters and a lot of the fighters and a lot of the managers, everybody's really having to rethink the entire sport. And I find that to be really, really interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to mention something, and something a lot of people don't think about. Locally, we know a guy who's a local promoter, and, his guys, he was going to be one of the last shows before they stopped it. And so they did the weigh-in, and right after the weigh-in, Pennsylvania State Commission halts all the fights. This guy still paid his fighters. So, he took a huge hit because he had to pay fighters, and he had no revenue, no show. So, a lot of people don't understand, the elite guys that I was talking, we talk elite because they're signed, because a lot of guys have to work a full-time job.
That's right.
So while they're working a full-time job, they're still training 4 to 5 hours a day, and then they still got to come home and try to piece together a family life and homework with the kids and spend time with their wife. And then if you're in training camp, then you can't have relations with your wife, and it's just a lot of stuff.
Right.
So, and for a lot of these guys now, all of a sudden they're not fighting anymore. So there's no income, and they're in a pressure cooker. They're home with a wife, and the one thing about people not realizing with this COVID-19 is there's going to be a lot of COVID-19 babies because people are home now, but there's also going to be a lot of divorces because now you're figuring out that your significant other, while you're spending 24 hours a day, may not be the person you want to spend 24 hours a day with. And then you couple that with some boxers take a lot of damage, and that damage alters their brain.
You got that.
Some of them become very aggressive. There's I'm not going to get into names of guys, but they're a lot of very famous guys that their personality, not just their speech pattern, their personality totally changed. They became very aggressive guys. So you got one of those guys at home spending 24 hours a day and no money coming in, which is what makes most families go to a divorce. Our current situation is like the perfect storm to test everything.
Yeah, you're right.
And in our sport, it's tough. It's really tough.
Yeah, and I've always said that the killer of a really great fighter is not another fighter. The killer of a great fighter is lack of activity or lack of training, right? If you're not able to spar, you're not able to train properly, and you're not getting fights, you're not active, that will kill an athlete. It's a difficult position to be in. And I think the fighters, kudos to the fighters that are out there now and, that are running and training and staying in the gym or doing whatever they can to be in shape. Because when we are able to get back to boxing, what that's going to look like will probably be completely different. But the fighters are still going to be expected to be in tip-top shape, right?
Right now, and a lot of people may or may not know you on the coaching side, and you've been in boxing for a long time, Coach. Like, this situation right now hasn't happened in 102 years. Okay, so now this is a situation that makes you or breaks you. The guys who are disciplined are going to stay disciplined, and as you get older, if you're somebody who's propense to becoming to eating, because now you can't go to the gym. And, you eat and you get depressed. That's even worse for a fighter who gets older because, Bernard Hopkins was able to fight into the age he did because Bernard Hopkins is a highly disciplined individual, a very rare breed. There's a local guy called Frankie the Alba. Frankie was a highly disciplined fighter. He always stayed busy and in the gym. You know what I'm saying? The guys who you have to stay after they fight, they don't come back for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to the gym.
Wow.
The disciplined guy's there Monday. So that type of fighter, as he gets older, and then you got like the COVID-19 situation where this guy might show up 40 pounds heavier than where he should be after the end of all of this.
Right.
I mean, and if he's a guy past his 30s, it's going to be so much harder on his body. He's not, he's not going to be focused on boxing. He's going to be focused on cutting weight, and he's not going to be a strong fighter that night. He's just going to be a guy who made weight to fight.
Right. So, really, you got fighters that are fighting in weight classes, campaigning at certain weight classes. And what's going to happen is those fighters are going to have to be campaigning at a higher weight class because they've, jumped up a weight class, during this pandemic.
Let's say they did make weight. Let's say they did make weight and they just barely made weight. I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota when Canelo's brother fought his last fight, and he fainted before the weigh-ins, and I think he made it through the second round. I mean, he was like 16 pounds over the day before the weigh-in, and he lost that overnight. He barely he collapsed in the elevator. He collapsed in the lobby. Clearly, and that's a high example, but let's say a guy who's not so high, he makes weight, but he barely made weight. Is he really at his best? I mean, Coach, that in 24 hours you can't rehydrate the water the liquid that you sweated out from your spinal cord and what protects your brain.
That's right.
So you're more propense to a really bad injury because that takes a lot more than 24 hours to fully hydrate again.
Yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right, and that brings on a completely different set of problems there. You're talking about safety issues and a lot of issues that the boxing commissions and the sport in general, everyone involved in the sport are keenly interested in and paying attention to, because the Lord knows we do not need to lose another fighter. We lost a couple of fighters this past year, and it's really, I just don't need to go down that road anymore. But yeah, I mean, the pandemic is going to reshape how we approach the sport, and I'm very, very interested in keenly paying attention to how that's gonna be. So, Vic, I just want to take a moment to for our listeners. I want to share something about a boxing apparatus that I know about, and I want to share it with you. And then when we come back, I'd love to talk to you more about how you got to be a Cutman, and what what a Cutman's life is like, right? So we'll be back in just a couple of seconds.
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to tell you about a very innovative product for the boxing and mixed martial arts world called the Spar Bar. This unit is absolutely incredible. It mimics a sparring partner without actually having a sparring partner. And you guys know at this time, a lot of us are not able to get together and spar. So the Spar Bar is your solution. The Spar Bar is endorsed and used by some of the world's greatest fighters, including Anthony Joshua, Sugar Ray Leonard, Anderson Spider Silva, Tyson Woodley, Roy Jones Jr., and even, some Hollywood superstars are using it, like Kevin Hart and Usher. This thing is incredible. And if you want a piece of equipment, a single standalone piece of equipment that you can use in your home or in your gym, doesn't take up much space. They have a handful of different product lines. You can mount it to the wall. You can have a freestanding unit. Whatever your gym setup is or your home setup is, there's a product that you can use. So I just want to encourage you to check out the Spar Bar. Go to www.sparbar.com and check out their product line. It's absolutely incredible. I can't wait. My Spar Bar should be coming any day now, but you got to check out the Spar Bar. I've used it in a bunch of gyms. I was at Gleason's Jersey Shore, and they have a bunch of Spar Bars down there, and I will tell you, that unit is incredible. Check out the Spar Bar. Again, www.sparbar.com. And Vic, we're back, brother. We're back. So,
hey, Coach, I want one of those Spar Bars. I'm telling you, I can use it right now. And I'm moving to Mexico. I want to take one down to the gym down there with the kids I'm working with down there.
Yeah,
down in Puerto Vallarta.
Let's see what we can do. Let's see the folks at Spar Bar. Hopefully they'll hear your message and send you a Spar Bar, man. You know that. If I can.
I'm definitely interested. I've seen them when they first, the concept first came out, and what's out there now is so much better.
It's an incredible unit, and actually, they're working on all kinds of interesting things with that, with the Spar Bar. They're coming out with a workout program for the Spar Bar, or for, I guess, supposedly you could have 6 or 7 Spar Bars in your gym and do like circuit training or group training, and so it'll be interesting to see how that unit plays out. I certainly have used it, and it's incredible. It hit me a couple of times in the head. It really makes you keep your hands up and stuff. So anyway, I just wanted to switch gears here a little bit and just talk about your entrance into the cuts business, right? And how you found being a cut man, how you came to that. And a little bit about the experience you've had in the profession.
So when I decided, I saw my kids were bleeders, I was like, man, they're going to suffer from the same thing I did. So I went and found Stephen Katz. Stephen Katz was Frankie Edgar's cutman up to UFC 137. And then after that, the UFC brought in their own guys, but there's some other stuff with management, whatever. It didn't work out, but he was his cutman for a long time. He's a renowned cutman in the New York area, and he does courses. So I went to 2 courses from him, and it's one thing to go do the course, and of course I was working amateurs as a coach and stuff, and I would stop my guys' cuts. So that's how I started my practical application of it. But then I went out and I found Billy Briscoe. Billy Briscoe, there's 2 outstanding cutmen in Philly. I mean, Joy Eye is very known. He's in the Rocky movies and stuff. But there's 2 guys that are, like 40 years in the business each. One is Danny Davis, and the other one was Billy Briscoe. I personally did not know Danny Davis at the time. I do now. He's a good friend of mine. Excellent. He's one of my brothers. I know Joey also. Good guy too. But Billy Briscoe was the guy who I bonded with, and he's my mentor in boxing. We can say he's my father in boxing.
Yeah.
He was Gabe Rosado. Yeah. He outstanding. Not only an excellent human being, an excellent coach. He was Gabe Rosado's coach, an excellent cut man. And he's lived in a gym since he was like 12 years old.
Yeah, Billy's among the best in the world, actually.
In the world.
And those people that don't know Billy Briscoe, he's just an outstanding human being, super humble, just a really, really quality human being not just in the sport of boxing, but in the world. So shout out to Billy Briscoe.
And every time I've been around Billy, I've always learned something new in boxing, something new as a cut man, something new as a human being. And and on top of that, Billy is a absolute aficionado, weaponry, military history. So we get along really well. But he was my mentor. He's the guy who really spent the time teaching me how to wrap hands and made me think of a lot of different things. He would sit by me and watch me and critique me afterwards. Always, hey, listen. And Billy never does. The funny thing about Billy that I'm working on is Billy's not opinion. So if he doesn't have something good to say about somebody, Billy won't say anything. So when Billy says, well, I've never really worked with that guy, but he's been in the business for 40 years. He's being a class act, and he's saying, you know what? If I got nothing good to say, I won't say anything.
That's right. You're right about that.
Unfortunately, I'm very opinionated sometimes, so I'm working on that, and learning from, trying to be more like my mentor. And so he was my first guy. Then Aaron Navarro out of Main Street Boxing in Houston, Texas. That's Lou Savarisa's gym. Jaime Cantu out of Kingsville Boxing. His son, little Oscar, is a champ. But Jaime is also very good. And a lot of these older Mexican cutmen from the West Coast and guys like Mosquera. I've had a lot. Mo Morales from Marshalls from King's Boxing Promotion. He mentored me when I was coming up. He would sit with me, or he'd bring me on, even though he didn't need me. He'd bring me on in his corner,
wow.
and I would be the corner man, the cut man, and he would walk me through stuff. So I had a lot of guys that opened up to me and helped me out. Yeah. So even Danny Davis taught, we would be talking about stuff. He'd always say, hey, have you thought of this? Miguel Diaz taught Billy, and Miguel Diaz is my grandfather in boxing. He's 82 years old. He's top-ranked cutman. I mean, there's nobody more storied as a cutman alive at this moment than Miguel Diaz. I mean, he did Mike Tyson. He's done Muhammad Ali. I mean, so I was very, very blessed to have some top people teach me.
Yeah, so what that's called is an apprenticeship. So like you had an apprenticeship with some of the finest cutmen in the business. And so for folks out there that are listening, Vic, tell us a little bit about what makes a cutman so important to have in the corner. Like why, listen, I wouldn't go into a corner for an important fight without you, right? But for folks that don't know you or don't know why it's important to have a quality cutman in the corner, why don't you just tell us a little bit about why that is important?
Billy Briscoe told me something one day, and it always stuck with me. Having a cutman is like car insurance. You may never need it, but when you need it, Jesus Christ, you better have good car insurance. And listen, Steve USS Cunningham brought Buddy, the minister from Rock Ministry, Buddy Osborne. So Buddy Osborne is also another really good cut man. He doesn't work a lot. He's very exclusive. But Buddy, his first fight as a cut man is Steve's title fight in Germany, where Steve gets knocked down the first round and gets cut horribly.
Wow.
And Buddy was able to close the cut. And Steve not only finished the fight, he became a world champion.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's
what a quality Cutman can do for you.
Yeah, for sure. So Vic, what if you remember? I want you to tell me what your 3, if you can think back, because you've done a lot of cuts, man. I know. What's your record as a cut man? Tell me.
Right now, I got 489 fights without a stoppage due to a cut.
What?
Pro boxing.
That's amazing. And so, out of those fights, can you name 3 of the top fights that you had that were the most trying but the most successful?
Oh, so I've done bare knuckles also. Like I've worked one corner and Stitch Duran in the other. Bare knuckles fighting championship. So by far my toughest night as a cut man, I was Artem Lobov's cut man on when he fought Knight, the first fight.
Right.
And Artem was Conor McGregor's sparring partner.
Right.
They call him the Russian Hammer. He had 13 cuts on his face in 5 rounds.
Wow.
I used a bottle and a half of adrenaline on him, which I've never in my life used. And I was concerned about the amount of adrenaline and the fact that I was going to run out of adrenaline. And it was such a gory, brutal fight. If you look on Forbes magazine and type in bare knuckles, you'll see the picture of him and I standing next to him at the end of the fight.
Yeah.
And even his hands are cut up. But I mean, his face had 13 cuts. I mean, and I'm thinking to my head, the order of cuts is above the eye first because that'll stop the fight.
That's right.
The nose because the fighter will aspirate blood and panic. Mm-hmm. And then any other cut I can do after that is secondary. So it's above the eyes and in the nose. And anything else, So
wow.
I 13 cuts. One cut looked like a W on his eyebrow. I was like, I'm looking at that cut going, what do I do with this thing?
Wow.
But I don't ever show the fighter that. I'm like, yeah, I got you. And in my mind, I'm like, Jesus Christ, it looks like a W. Like I've never seen 3 lacerations coming together. I was like, it looks like a W in his head.
Right.
I got you.
Was the W like W for win, right? Win. We're gonna win this fight.
He won.
Yes.
Based on that night, his win allowed him to fight Paulie Malignaggi next.
Okay. All right.
So my second fight would have to be, due to the nastiness of the cut, would have been Robert Sizzle Sims.
Okay.
And he had a nasty, he was fighting Colby. He was out of the camp that Gervonta Tank Davis comes from. And he got a really nasty cut. And the problem with this cut was when you see the yellowy fat tissue under the skin, that's the subcutaneous level. That's a bad cut.
Oh, yeah.
But it was borderline. It wasn't a lot of fat, but I knew if the doctor saw it, it was over. So when I walk over, I said, this is going to hurt. I grabbed the microfiber and I slipped it across his face. And I took that little yellow layer of fat. I was hoping I'd be able to peel it, which I did. And Robert Sims didn't wince or cry because that's a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And I was able to peel that before the doctor got to him. And then I put the epinephrine in there, and we were able to stop the cut. But it was a deep gash.
Wow.
And a third one, man, I've had a lot of really bad. I did MMA for a while. I've had a really my first fight. My fighter comes back from round 1 and he had a gash on between his eyebrow and his eyelid, and it was wide open, and you could fit a jumbo shrimp in there.
Wow!
But it wasn't bleeding, and you couldn't see the eyeball. Okay. So, I put the epi in there, and in MMA, you mix potato starch with Vaseline. So when you're watching MMA and you see a guy get hit and something goes flying off, that's called a plug because the cuts due to elbows and shin kicks and knees, the lacerations are horrible. So you got to be able to fill that gap in, because the MMA gloves, as they come to where the fingertips are, come down, and there the leather's right there. So if you don't fill that gap in, that leather grabs that cut and just shreds his face open.
Right.
So I put the plug in there. I put the epi, and I told him, I said, I can only guarantee you this round. And he went out and he push kicked an over Superman. Now push kicked and Superman, the guy knocked him out.
Wow.
And in first 20 seconds of round 2, I was like, oh my God, thank God. That was my first cut ever. I was like, Jesus Christ. But he wasn't bleeding out of it. I couldn't believe he wasn't bleeding. I was like, Jesus Christ, this thing was horrible. But yeah, no, that would have to be my third word. And the amount of experience, I had no experience. I was like, oh my God.
So that was like one of the early fights during the early days.
I don't even count that. When I tell you 489, I'm counting just boxing and bare knuckles. I don't count the MMA fights in the 489.
Right. Wow, that's incredible. So, okay, why don't you share? Tell me a crazy, like something that happened in the last couple of years that was just in the sport of boxing that to you was just completely outlandish and crazy. Something you never saw before, never experienced before, right off the cuff.
Well, I would have to say with that one, the guys I've met in boxing, like, hanging out with Miguel Diaz at the fights where unfortunately Max Dadashev passed away during that fight, during that card. But I got to hang out with Miguel Diaz, being around Buddy McGirt, being with that camp.
What was it about being in Buddy's camp that was?
Man, I mean, listen, I've been in boxing since I was 12. I took a break for a lot of years, but I boxed out of Brockton for a while, and I grew up watching Buddy McGirt. You know what I'm saying? I've hung out with Mike Tyson. I've met Evander Holyfield a bunch of times, including at the the first Sugarbird, and a few other tournaments. I mean, some of the people, and hung out with Teddy Atlas. Just some of the people that I've met in the sport. Miguel Diaz, it was incredible. Just a lot of people that I've met. I've met Bob Arum. Just a lot of the people that I've met in the sport, and some of them, the real great ones, are super humble.
That's right. Yeah, sure. So
I hung out with a guy who owns a boxing promotion that used to be the hottest boxing promotion, and hung out with him a couple of times. I've been around him, and the guy was just absolutely not a nice guy to be around. Right. I've also hung out with Julio Cesar Chavez in Mexico a couple of times. I've met Nacho Beristain.
Yeah, sure.
I spent 10 days at Nacho in a camp. I don't know, man. Like, I never in my life thought I'd meet some of these guys and travel and get to do, I've traveled with Marshall Kaufman down to Dominican Republic.
Right.
And we took a 3-time gold Olympian from Russia to fight an Olympian from DR. I mean, I've been blessed. I've traveled to Europe. I've done a lot of stuff I never thought I would.
Well, that's amazing. The life of a Cutman. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
You're living the dream, brother. You're living the dream.
Coach, I'm living the dream. Some days it's not my dream, but I'm definitely living somebody's dream.
That's right. So you mentioned earlier Evander Holyfield, meeting Evander Holyfield, and I'm sure that was incredible. I've actually spent some time with him as well, and he's an amazing man and has accomplished pretty much everything there is to accomplish in the sport of boxing. But I wanted to know, have you heard this news that Mike Tyson is considering returning to boxing? Have you heard that?
Yeah, I know James Toney and I met him at Buddy's. James Toney might be returning, and I know James will get in the ring with anybody. That guy,
yes, he will.
And he can fight. That guy, yeah. So Mike is returning supposedly, but I don't know if it'll be bare knuckles or not. Evander said he would definitely be down to fight Mike for an exhibition bout, which, you know, so a lot of people are arguing on the internet, though Mike Tyson's going to take over the heavyweight division. Listen, it's phenomenal that he's back. He looks really good, but that's against pads, and that's not over a bunch of rounds and with somebody banging on his body or hitting him in the eardrum, messing up his equilibrium, or banging on his head.
That's right.
Like, you know,
he's
and
also,
I'm not taking anything away from Mike.
He's also 53 years old, you know, and so, you know, I think I read a quote from him that said the god of fighting has returned in him, and that he, you know, he feels it's time to return, which I find to be really an interesting perspective on his part. He's come so far in his life, and I just wonder if the return back to the sport is what he should be doing. And far be it for me to tell a fighter not to get back in the ring, because, you know, I love to be in the ring myself whenever I can. But also, Evander Holyfield's 57, you know, and I hear that they're throwing. I heard some murmuring of Shannon Briggs getting back in to the mix.
Oh yeah,
as
well Shannon's definitely signed with bare knuckles, so he's supposed to definitely be fighting.
Wow, yeah. So that's you know, I think it's really interesting. I will tell you that if you remove the thought of him being 57 and Evander being 57, even if they come back for an exhibition of sorts, I can't think of a fight that would be more interesting and more promotable than Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson. I just can't, you know, if KS1 if that fight can happen, then, you know, I can't have, this would be a blockbuster. What do you think about that?
Well, I definitely think it's sellable, and I definitely think that Dave Feldman can make it happen, because Dave Feldman, most of his fights are in Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. So if he had a problem with a commission, he has options. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And because this fight, I don't think you'll sign him for $20 million. They're saying $20 million. Who knows? Who knows? You know, that fight may generate listen, a lot of people say bare knuckles would never happen. It's happening, right? And,
yes,
you know, that if you watch Artem Lobov, Jason Knight won, that I worked that fight. Lobov knocked 3 of Knight's teeth out. Four of his teeth and 4 different punches. If you look at the pictures after the fight, or you can look on my Facebook, the Cutman Vic Starita, or you will see it looked like the 2 of them were put through a mulcher. Okay,
right.
But that fight was incredibly sellable. It sold a lot, and that's just those 2 guys.
Right.
The history that these guys have of 3 fights, you know, that they have with 3 fights and a missing ear. And the bad blood that they had in years past, I don't know. I mean, they could be 53 and 57, and you know, the last thing that leaves a fighter is his strength. I mean, his reflexes, his speed.
Yeah, the power is definitely
the 2 of them got power. Yep, and you got two. You know, can I say a bad word on this podcast or not?
I prefer you didn't, if you didn't have to, but
okay.
You know.
Well, you got 2 cock-strong heavyweights that are gonna go at it, right?
Right.
And let me tell you, if they drop their stones and let it hang out,
yeah,
and go at it, that could be a really nasty fight, especially bare knuckles.
Right.
Oh my God, you know.
Yeah, that could be a brutal. That could be a brutal exchange there.
You know, some people think that Evander, you know, being that he's a country boy. Let me tell you something. What it took for Evander Holyfield to do what he did in boxing, right? At different divisions, at different times, and always at that high level. Listen, that guy that doesn't matter. He's a straight up fighter.
Yeah.
And when you got a guy from Brownsville like Mike Tyson, who's been through all the things he's been through and demons, and he's been down and up, and he's still here.
Yeah.
And Mike is not broke. Mike has a marijuana thing, and he's got a pot. He's doing well. Right. So if he's back to boxing, it's because his heart is in it. Because he would not even hit a heavy bag. He told me he wouldn't even touch one.
Right.
So for him to be doing this, something in him sparked, and that furnace is back on. And Evander is a quiet guy. I've met him a bunch of times, but Evander got that little bite to him. If those two guys go at it, that's going to be a nasty, nasty fight. Very sellable. You know?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's not only sellable, it's a really dangerous place for two men in their 50s to be in. You know,
well, they're doing this because there's something in it that says, "Hey, you know what? I'm still a man. And I can still toe the line." and I'm going to show everybody. You know?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's
going to be a crazy. If they fight, let me tell you, I don't think the fight will go to the end. I think one of them will put the other one out.
Yeah, somebody's going to get knocked out. Definitely.
Yeah.
You know, well, I just can't think of a better person to have on the Boxing Breakdown, and I'm just so thankful and appreciative of you being able to clear some time tonight to be on the program. And I just wanted to wish you luck, and I know you're going to be around here in PA for a while. And be making your trip back to Mexico and back to the States, back and forth. But I look forward to seeing you at the fights, and I look forward to getting together with you before the fights. And I just want to thank you for being on the program. And
Coach, people don't know I've worked your corners before, and it's always been a pleasure to serve you, work with your team. And you guys have always been straight up professionals, from the fighter being in shape, his head being right, being conditioned, on weight, disciplined, sleeping well before the fight, sticking, as much as they could to a plan, because a lot of fighters they make up their mind. But, you were one of the easiest coaches to work with because you were so professional in the way that you handle your coaching and your fighter and your business of fighting. So it was always a pleasure working corners with you.
Oh, Vic, thank you so much for saying that. And it's the pleasure is all mine. I can't think of a better Cutman to have in the corner, and certainly when we go into battle, I would definitely be bringing you with me,
Always.
And I would recommend that for other fighters out there too. If you get Vic Starita out there at the fights and you see him there, you better grab him early because he's the man. He's the cut man with the plan. So, Vic, I want to thank you again for being on the program. And with that, I'm going to sign on out. So stand by for 1 second. And thanks for listening. We'll be back next Thursday, 8:00 p.m., and see you next time on the Boxing Breakdown.